Ever been annoyed that you can't jump in this kind of game? Well, I just tweaked this is the same dev build I already have, but I just tweaked it slightly now to just be an insane, broken monstrosity. Alright, now, I want to tell you, and some of you read my comments know that I was planning this anyway. Before Worldslayer, I already knew about armored division and what I was planning to do with my skill tree on my martial build. And I was doing the math in my head, and I'm like, dude, I can get, Grav Leap to a 5-second cooldown. Now, when the game launched, and you see it right there, 1.4 seconds. And for Endless Mass, and for Boulder Dash. And Boulder Dash could be 0.7 if I still had the 50% cooldown, but it's like, I don't need that. So you know what, let's not. I can use it for something else, like permanent resistance from Boulder Dash. Add to the debuffs on this dude. So, you see me going through the skill tree, everything I'm showing. When I first started this game, my Grav Leap went from 7.6 second cooldown, which was the previous max possible, to 5.2. As I played through the campaign, it inexplicably went to 5, I think, because I was upgrading my gear, just slightly, increased it to just a flat 5. Now, they've told me there's a global cooldown max. So when I did this, I'm like, I just was skeptical and just wasn't really a believer in the beginning that I could even get it to insane low. I figured at most, if I went all the way, maybe I'd get it just to 4 seconds, but I'm like, I figured, just 1 second, it's not worth it. It's already at 5 seconds. Let's focus on giving this dude more weapon leech. Let's focus on trying to do more tanking. And so you saw that I switched to going both trees to get Earthen Shield, which, by the way, Earthen Shield is very good. I have to say that. I bet there's already dev builds, other invincible dev builds doing that. And if they do nerf this in some drastic way, that will be what assuming they don't nerf it, like they don't destroy the build, you know what I mean? I come back and then suddenly you can't get less than 10 seconds on Grav Leap no matter what you do. That would be really annoying. Then I just play a different class at that point, or just create a non-Grav Leap build. But, if they just nerf it to the point where it's like, oh, my 1.4 seconds doing the exact same build they've laid out suddenly is like 3 seconds, I'd probably still keep doing it, because it's just insane. But if it's too much of a nerf, but not enough to just destroy it, then I already know what I'd go back to. I'd go back to Weapon Leech on my gun, I'd go back to Earthen Shield probably, if that didn't get nerfed a bunch, so there's options, in other words, still, if they ever address this. Although I honestly kind of doubt it, just because the devs usually don't even know about a lot of this stuff, because they're all too tied up with the damage meta builds, and this one certainly is not that. And it probably won't even get that popular, because people, again, just care about doing max damage, which this one certainly doesn't do that, but it is incredibly fun, and it is incredibly broken, and is incredibly tanky, and probably one of the most invincible devs ever. It's invincible because most of the time I'm in invincible modes. I think I'm either Grav Leaping invincible, or I'm in Boulder Dash 9 invincible, healing still from that. So I'm like, oh my gosh, dude, it is so freaking busted. I couldn't believe it. I started to do it, and then my cooldown dropped to 2.7 seconds, and then I'm like, that's insane. Alright, it's clearly multiplicative. It's going up exponentially the more I do this kind of build, so I have to do it. I have to go max. I need to find a way to get every armor-piercing node in that skill tree. If we have to give up some, and I did. So, I gave up Weapon Leech on my gun, I gave up more health and more armor, but the end result is I'm tankier, I say, just because I'm in the air far more. I still have the Weapon Leech Harvester node on my Ascension tree that you saw. My plan is to still max Weapon Leech next. It'll be 5.5% at 10, just to get a little more. And if you don't notice, so I then realized the best gun for this build is Heir to the Desert, ironically, because it's got armor-piercing, skill leech, status power attributes, and it's got Sandstorm, which still heals you based off your Weapon Leech stat. And then I get to slap the Tornado with it, which I always wanted to do. That's why I also like to think of this build as kind of like a vortex abyss build, because I can lob endless masses everywhere, and you just see that, if you just saw it, that just looks so cool to me. Getting the tornado and the electric tornado just stacked is just so freaking cool. I tell you what, I feel like the best thing for it next might be Firestorm, which might still heal you, and you just drop a beam down from the sky, lighting up my tornado and my electric energy circling around the place like that. That's like the ultimate just like vortex kind of healing you build. And that's, by the way, is why I'm still positive about getting even more healing, because now that I'm using Air to the Desert, that increases my chance. If you're using legendaries, it's a lot easier to get that with a god roll than to get like a god roll epic gear with perfect attributes, perfect 2 mods on it. So honestly, if I can get Air to the Desert, Apocalypse Air to the Desert, I think god roll would be Ravenous Locust on it, which they buffed and is back to where it was before, but that still would heal you. Has a long duration, inflicts weakness for what it's worth. So yeah, it'd either be Ravenous Locust or maybe Firestorm or maybe some other damage over time mod. Even if it's Death Chains, I'd still do it, obviously, because that's still better. Even if it's not that, if it's just more damage, then still that's better. So I feel like I have increased my odds of actually getting a good tier 3 gun now for my primary. By the way, if they ever do nerf, if you noticed, I took off Moaning. I'm not even using Moaning Winds just because I'm using my skills so much. It's like I barely ever shoot or have time to swap anything. I think it's not even worth it. Just keep the Sandstorm and that stuff. It's good to have those long cooldowns now, doing damage over time, getting increased by my debuffs, and then healing me. So yeah, so if you saw, I think intelligently, not to brag, but I just realized, I'm not even going to be using my other 2 weapons, so let's just make them rare stuff, so that way I just keep my level maxed on those 2 things, and all I have to spend is iron to do it. And that doesn't affect it's weapons, so it doesn't affect any of my armor stat at all. Doesn't make me less tanky. And it makes it a heck of a lot easier to keep my average gear score up, and make it, if anything, it's going to help make it quicker to grind now, because I don't have as much freaking supply drop resources I need for stuff anymore by doing that. So yeah, I did that. By the way, I think you just saw in the video. One last note. I tweaked I'm always tweaking these builds. So I took the Pax tree. I took off the hardened from my Pax tree and ironically put on the effect where every 7 seconds kinetic skills can take off effect resistance off elites, because I realized, I don't need hardened. It's such a minor one. I wish it was more than just 5% as a base amount, and I mean it maxes at 10, at 15, which you won't have most of the time. So I'm like, I wish it was like 10 or 15 as a base amount, then I'd probably still keep it. But I'm like, no, I don't really need it. Let's get the effect resistance, taking it off with kinetic skills, because that further complements how this build is like a maximum debuff team support in that way. Maximum interrupt devastator. And now I take effect resistance off constantly, which for what it's worth, it's like, okay, that just makes my teammates cast their own debuffs and status effects even more on that dude. And for my build, it makes me be able to use Endless Mass and Elites more often. And I now, if I did other expeditions after this, and I could literally lock Brood Mothers in Endless Mass till they died. It was freaking awesome. And one last thing too is like, I didn't do it this build, but I did in this expedition, but I did in other missions. Another easy, when you have a 1.4 second cooldown on Endless Mass with Martial bonus, I realized, when there's tons of ads around, I'm better off just casting that everywhere constantly, and it's just madness. It just creates a gigantic amount of just mobs not knowing where they're going everywhere. The low cooldowns makes you kind of choose which skill you just want to hammer for a bit. Usually it is Grav Leap, and then just Boulder Dash to get that permanent debuff on. But yeah, oh man, even Endless Mass is just a blast now.